SDRplay, based in Dallas, Texas, and my colleague Mike Ladd is based down in southern Florida. So
Southern Florida.
what you have is the entire North American contingent of SDRplay tonight. Mike's very shy, so he wants me to do most of the talking. And you may know his name if you've seen any of our videos on our website. Mike's done a bunch of them, a whole series of stuff on how to use your SDR radios, and I've done a few as well. So I don't know, Mike. They think I'm amazing. I don't know what they think about you. At least that's what Joe says. So is everybody there? Are you guys ready to start?
Yeah, we are.
Get started.
Okay. So I was chatting with Joe earlier, and I've got a very long PowerPoint presentation here, and I'm convinced that if I just go slide by slide, all you guys are going to fall asleep. So I'm going to just sort of jump back and forth in and out of it and take questions from you and so on and so forth. And we'll try and make this a little bit interactive. Joe already has a complete copy of the presentation, so at some point I think he'll probably be distributing that to you so you can go into it in more depth when you have more time. And I did warn Joe, I mean, you let me free rein, I'm just going to go on for an hour and a half or more, and you guys are going to be kicked out of that room and the lights will be off by then. So I'm going to try and keep an eye on the clock and move at a reasonably fast pace here. But as I say, I like it to be interactive, so you know, if I see any of your heads dropping there, I'll try and speed it up a little bit. And Joe, if you're near the front of the room or something, it's pretty hard for me to see individual people. So if a question comes up, feel free to interrupt me and have me try and answer it. And if it's very easy, I'll answer it. And if it's not very easy, and indeed if it's extremely difficult, I'll have Mike answer it.
And if I can't answer it, we'll get you the answer.
There you go. So let me jump into this presentation here real quick. Just I've got to figure out, where's it gone? I've lost the share screen option. Where is it? Share screen. There we go. Desktop. Let's try that. Okay. Hopefully you guys can see me and maybe Mike on screen and in the corner, and then you should see something behind us called an Introduction to Software-Defined Radio.
Yep, we got you.
You got it?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So I labored at great length for many hours to do this presentation, specifically for the Fond du Lac Amateur Radio Club, Inc., as you see in the bottom corner. And I don't know what your level of expertise and knowledge is on SDRs, so I'm going to go through a brief introduction, and let's see, I don't know if it'll advance without me putting us behind the presentation. So what is an SDR? And bottom line is, I'm not going to read the slides to you, I hope you can read it anyway, but what you do is we're trying to take a lot of the elements of the radio and implement it in software instead of doing it in hardware. And so the hardware just consists of a bunch of pre-select filters and maybe a little bit of IF filtering, and then a big old analog to digital converter, and then you throw it all at a PC or some sort of computing engine to do the heavy lifting. That make sense?
Yep.
Sure.
So here it is in block diagram form. So we've got the antenna coming in to the front end, the A to D, typically a USB interface, and that goes into some sort of software, and that does all the clever stuff. That gives you a display, it demodulates the audio, it lets you make measurements, it lets you control things, decode things, shows you pretty spectrums and waterfalls and stuff. And what you see on the right there is a little system I built on the back of it's actually my RV system. It was designed to be used in my van, so I've got a mini PC and an Rsb Duo mounted on the back of the monitor, And I've got a little wireless keyboard and mouse that goes with it. It's kind of cool.
Okay.
Why do you want one? Well, again, you can read the list, and I guess I should point out that the SDR thing is kind of divided into two camps pretty much. In the one camp, we have what I'm talking about today, which is essentially a general coverage receiver that works over a very large frequency range. The other way is a lot of people building conventional rigs, transceivers, are using more and more software-defined radio techniques in terms of processing the signal. So if you find these fancy new Yosu rigs or icons or what have you, you'll find that using DSP techniques to implement much better filters than they had before. So, you know, these are some of the things you can do with software-defined radio. From the standpoint of the Rsb family that I'm primarily talking about tonight, what it means is that by using the power of something you already have, namely your computer, that we can generate or produce a fairly low-cost black box that you can use with your computer and implement a very capable receiver. Some of the other things under 7 there, you can record large bandwidths of the spectrum and tune through it again later, which is really good if you're DXing and trying to identify stations that transmit a call sign or whatever on the hour. There are a lot of new applications. I was talking to Joe, and we've both, I think, spent a lot of time doing software testing in the past. And when I got back into the business here with SDRplay a few years back, there's a whole bunch of stuff I didn't know existed, and you can see some of the things there, primarily the digital mode stuff. So there's all sorts of cool stuff. But the bottom line, as far as I'm concerned, is if you're a ham, is it possible to have too many receivers? I think not, right? So very briefly, some of the applications. I talked about the digital modes, and there's a lot of digital decoding plugins and things that can be used with your RSP, and most of these are actually free, so it doesn't cost you anything. So FLDigi is one very popular package that can do digital voice decoding, and it can decode WeFax and stuff like that. And I'm not going to go into any of these in great length because of time. Another thing is HF WeatherFax, and Black Cat Systems is a vendor that has a number of packages, and they have taken steps to integrate their software quite closely with our SDR Uno. And I don't know, maybe later on Mike will tell us some more about that. I know he deals very closely with Chris and Black Cat. Multi-PSK is another popular add-on. I find it a little bit tedious to use, but it's capable of decoding a fairly large number of digital modes, which is cool. WSJTX is another very popular one. And on the right there is something called Grid Tracker, which will plot your QSOs on the map, which is kind of cool. And one of Mike's favorites is CSV User List Browser. And I heard they've just done an update, Mike, is that right?
I believe so. Rick mentioned it, I believe in Groups IO. They did come out with an update.
Yeah.
With most of this software, it's continually updated.
Yeah, and so anyway, what that does, actually you can tell us what it does, Mike. The bottom right window is part of...
Basically, it's going to store a database, and whatever frequency or VFO that SDR Uno is tuned to, it's going to compare it to its internal database and tell you what station is broadcasting. Once it has a match, it's going to plot your QTH to the QTH of the transmission site, and if you look on the bottom left of Steve's presentation screen, you'll see a map with UTC time and local time, and you'll see a red R. So it's going to show me long path and short path. Right now it's just showing short path. So it's basically just a database, and it's going to cross-reference the frequency I'm tuned to whatever station could possibly be transmitting at that specific time.
Pretty cool stuff, huh?
Very cool.
Okay, moving on to something totally different, and I might be able to give you a little demo here, is you're probably familiar with ADSB, which are the transponders fitted to aircraft, and what they do is they transmit information like speed, heading, altitude, and all that good stuff. And there's some software that's been floating around for a while now called Dump 1090. And I think what I'd like to do, just to relieve the monotony of PowerPoint, is I'm going to jump back to my other screen. And if we're lucky, yeah, here we go. I've got an Rsb 1A here on my desk. Let me show you what it looks like real quick. This is one of the, mine's got one there, you can see his better. And all I've got on mine is a short telescopic antenna. And I've got it set up to run in SDR. Oh, you've got them all there, good for you, mate. And SDR Uno is our own software that we develop for use with our RSP products. And let's move the window out of the way. So what you see here is you've got a main control panel here, and then something we call RX control. That's supposed to look like a rig. So you've got a frequency display, you've got all the modes, AM, synchronous, AM, FM, CW, double sideband, low sideband, upper sideband. You've got some filtering and all sorts of good stuff. VFO, A and B, just like you'd have on a regular rig, volume control and so on. And then the heart of this thing is at the bottom. It's bottom right here. You have a frequency spectrum and a waterfall. Basically just a historical representation of that frequency spectrum. And when you tune a signal, in fact, let's make it play. Go. That's a very strong AM broadcast station. I'm going to move that. So you can see it bouncing up and down, and there's the filter we've got set here is what 6 kilohertz, and that 6 kilohertz is displayed in the secondary spectrum up in the upper right. So you get to zoom in and see what's going on. And the CW people love that because you get a much better idea of what's going on with the carriers. I use it because I'll click on the spectrum, and if I'm not exactly on the station, what I can do is I can scroll with my mouse wheel until I center it up, which is pretty cool. Some of the other features the software has is memory banks, and I've got a whole bunch of frequencies, which are my local air traffic control frequencies and so on. But one new feature we added recently is called plugins, and there's a little button at the top there called plugins. And I don't know how well you guys can see this, but there's a list of plugins here, some of which are provided by SDRplay, and some of them are provided by third parties. And since we were talking about ADSB, I thought I would show you that because I've only got a tiny antenna and this works pretty good. So if I hit ADSB and load plugins, I'll get a window that shows up that says ADSB plugin. I hit start, and immediately I'm picking up aircraft just off this little telescopic antenna on my desk. And you can combine that with some other software. Maybe I'll try real quick. I'm running all this in a virtual machine, so it can get kind of slow, but let's see what happens. I don't know if you've heard of virtual radar server, but what that does is that will take the information that's being picked up that you see on the lower right, and it will implement a little web server so you can look at it in a browser. So if I open up the web browser, I hate doing live demos, they always crash on you, right? So, let's see, I might as well click on this, it's on the local host, so let's try that, see if that'll bring it up. Here we go. And what always happens when I try this, maybe you can clue me in. Every time I do this, it always centers the map in England.
You have to, there's a configuration file that you have to set. There's a PDF. All the plugins come with most of them come with a help button, and there's an extensive PDF with setting up the ADSB decoder with, the virtual radar server. There's a bunch of packages.
Oh, there we go. It's cool. So you can see various aircraft all over the track here. There's McKinney. I'm just off the bottom here, near where that hand is, at the bottom of the map. And you can see various aircraft, and you can see their call signs. All the information's over here on the right, and you can select any particular one you're interested in, and it will plot its track on the map. So it tells you a little bit about what kind of aircraft it is. So we're looking at an Airbus A320 and so on. So this is all very cool stuff, and everything I've shown you here is free. So that's good to know, right? The virtual radar software is free, the plugin's free, our SDR Uno software is free. So I'm just going to stop that momentarily and jump back over to the presentation.
Anybody have any questions before?
I'm sorry, Mike?
Does anybody have any questions so far?
Have I lost everybody yet, or are we good?
No, we're here.
All right.
Okay. So continuing the saga here of what you can do with the software. Any of you guys there use Ham Radio Deluxe?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I've got a couple of app notes. If you're using HRD to control your rig and record logs and all that good stuff, here I'm showing a picture of HRD synchronized with SDR Uno. And there's a couple of different ways of doing it, and we've got app notes on our website that describe how to do it. So you know, you're still in business even if you use HRD. A lot of people started doing work picking up satellites. Here's a little portable system that someone's using down here in a warmer climate than where you guys are. Guy right up the street from me does a lot of weather satellite stuff. Here's some pictures of some hurricanes that were taken by a couple of our users. Bill Otten, he's down there somewhere not far from you, isn't he, Mike, down there in Florida?
Yeah, not too far.
Using some software called WX2ING, and this is actually on the old original Rsb one, so you can see that, and the newer GOES satellites, you get the whole Earth, you get the whole globe. And this was done by a guy called Bern Berets, who lives right up the street from me, about a couple of miles from where I'm speaking right now. So lots of cool stuff. And we got one guy sent us some information. He did a YouTube video picking up noise bursts from Jupiter, would you believe? So we're getting into radio astronomy as well with these things. As an aside, we have included, we've got a calibrated spectrum display, which I think is unique in the SDR field. And we have the ability for you to save power and signal to noise values to CSV files. There is also another piece of software you can use called the Spectrum Analyzer software, written by a gentleman down in Australia, I believe. And that enables you to basically duplicate a very expensive spectrum analyzer just using your RSB and some software. So from a hardware standpoint, and before we go on, very briefly, I was trying to give you a flavor there of the software capabilities that you get from this little black box. And as far as I'm concerned, to take that little piece of plastic and metal and hook it up to a PC and do all that stuff I showed you, I think is frankly downright amazing. And it's the sort of capabilities we couldn't even dream of a little while ago. So just a brief word about the hardware, because although, as I've shown, a lot of the hard lifting or heavy lifting is done in software, not all hardware is created equal. So here's a little chart that attempts to show performance on the vertical axis and cost and complexity on the horizontal axis. So down in the lower left, some of you may have played with the 8-bit dongles, and they do work. That's the good news, and I would never discourage anyone from trying one just to get your feet wet. However, if you step up to the $100 price point, you will find that there are much more capable SDRs available that will give you a lot more performance. So this is where I would say the RSB products fall. And so for a small amount of additional cost, you had a huge performance gain. On the other hand, if you want to go really high end, and normally when you go high end, that also implies some sort of specialization. There are some very high dollar SDRs out there, and you know, they perform very well. I mentioned before about general coverage SDRs versus trying to implement a transceiver. One example of a transceiver will be the radios that Flex makes. And Flex are, you know, not too far south from me here, and they make some absolutely fantastic software-defined transceivers. However, their emphasis tends to be more on, you know, the traditional type application where you're talking to someone on the radio versus necessarily what we're trying to do, which is be more of a general coverage receiver. But what I would say is when you go to the high end, there's a big cost adder, and I think I'm safe to say I think the performance gains are modest. Now, if you're dedicated and you want the absolute best, then those performance gains are worth it. But I think for your average ham, you end up spending a lot of money for a performance gain that won't be anything like as dramatic as you will see jumping up from an 8-bit dongle to say an RSP. Would you agree with that, Mike?
Yeah, also the chances are very good that their existing rig will tether with an RSP where they don't have to get rid of their existing transceiver. They can use what they have, possibly integrate an RF switch and integrate an RSP.
Yeah.
Or if they're trying a dongle, even an 8-bit, one of the RTL dongles, and then moving up, it's a secondary receiver on your transceiver.
In fact, I'll get back because if any of you, again, Joe mentioned earlier that a lot of you people may be interested in trying to build pan adapters and things like that. If that's the case, I've got a whole section coming up that we can, maybe we'll spend a bit more time on for you, okay? So let's continue and try and jump through this real quick. I'm not going to go through this slide. There's various things you may want to consider before you go out and buy an SDR, and you can make up your own mind. As far as the products we have to offer, we have the Rsb 1A and the Rsb DX, which is actually our newest product. And what they can do is they can tune up to 10 megahertz of spectrum at a time, but that 10 megahertz could be anywhere from 1 kilohertz on the low end all the way up to 2 gigahertz. So, you can move that 10 megahertz window anywhere you like from 1 kilohertz to 2 gigahertz. And once you pick that slice, you can actually monitor multiple signals within that 10 megahertz window. Now, the top of the range here for us is the Rsb Duo. Was that a Duo you held up earlier, Mike?
Yes.
Okay, I got one too. And what the Duo does, it can do that single 10 megahertz slice, just like I showed for the other two RSPs, but it has two independent tuners. So what you can do is you can actually split it into two slices. So instead of having one 10 megahertz slice, you can actually have two megahertz slices and position them independently anywhere over that range. And you may say, well, what does that buy me? And there's a few things. Okay, those are just generic capabilities of all of them. What the Duo lets you do is monitor two widely spaced bands. Remember, with the Rsb 1A and the DX, you have a 10 megahertz window. Well, with the Duo, you've got two separate tuners, so I can be looking at air traffic control here at 125 megahertz, and at the same time I can be monitoring the the 40 meter band at 7 megahertz. So if you have two widely spaced frequencies at the same time, that's where the Duo comes into its own.
The Duo is very popular amongst contesters, ham radio contesters, because they're monitoring multiple bands at one time, and they're trying to rack up as many points as possible. So they'll monitor 20 while working 40, or monitor 40 while working, 80.
Yeah, and I'll show you some more of that. So here's another instance. On the right is the ADSB. Here's another a different view of basically what I demonstrated to you a moment ago with aircraft plotted on the map. This stuff all goes on at 1.09 gigahertz, whereas air traffic control is down at 125, 130 megahertz. So the Duo lets you do both of those things at the same time, which is cool. And then the big one for the Duo is diversity tuning. Because you have two separate but synchronized tuners, you can feed them with two different antennas which could be separated either spatially, or one could be horizontally polarized, the other one vertically polarized, and you can mix and match those two signals to get the best signal to noise. So it's a good way of trying to pull stuff out of the mud, if you will. Or you can use it to null a particularly annoying interfering station that's in one particular direction. And you have a choice of applying this automatically. And what this little wheel thing is trying to show you is you've got the amplitude and phase of the two tuners, which you can change the gain of independently. And you can kind of grab this thing with your mouse and spin it around and change the relative phase and amplitude to get the best possible signal reception. And if you have time and you're interested in this, I recommend you head over to our website. There's a couple of YouTube videos that some of our users have done that show very dramatically the improvement in signal reception you can get by using diversity. So we think this is the way of the future.
And it's real time. As you're making those adjustments, you're seeing it in the spectrum.
Yeah. Just mentioning the DX has got its own little party trick. The Rsb 2 was a very popular device we had for some time because it had a built-in antenna switch. It allowed you to connect up to 3 antennas at a time, and it's now been replaced by the DX. And the reason for calling it the DX is it has an additional low-pass filter for LF and VLF, if you're interested in that. It also has a high dynamic range mode for improving the performance below 2 megahertz. So if you're one of those guys that looks for NDBs and things like that, then it's a superb radio to use. I don't know if any of you guys listen to BBC radio at all. There's a station which I think is now called Radio 4 that used to be called the Home Service, and it transmits on 198 kilohertz or 1500 meters. I had never heard that station since I left the UK until I got myself an Rsb DX. And using a magnetic loop in my backyard, I was actually able to copy that for the first time all the way across the Atlantic, which actually blew my mind. I had no idea that I could do that, but it works. So it's pretty impressive. And Joe has one of those, and I believe he's going to give you guys a real-time demo of it at some point, right, Joe?
Yeah, I've got mine set up right over there. After the meeting, anybody can go play with it if they like.
Yeah. So I encourage you to do that because, you know, brilliant as my presentations are, there's nothing that can compete with actually getting your hands on something and seeing it work in practice. So, okay, let's talk about software a little bit. I'm going to jump through this real quick. Basically, there's lots of software you can use for driving your RSBs, our own SDR Uno, and there's some other third-party stuff. There's even some new stuff that's not shown on here now. So, big choices in software. One of the key things about using Uno, what we're showing here is you can set up what we call virtual receivers, up to 16 of them. And here we're using a combination of SSTV decoding and WSJTX decoding. And what we've done is we've got 3 separate virtual receivers on different frequencies, and each one is feeding these decoders independently at the same time. Really cool stuff. I mentioned earlier that you can measure power level, signal to noise, and you can spit that out into a spreadsheet, play with it to your heart's content if that's something you're interested in doing. Scanning is a feature that we added a while back, and you can either scan a range of frequencies or you can scan frequencies that you've previously stored in one of your memory banks. And that's a super feature that got added into SDR Uno not long ago. Plugins, well, we just showed one of those. We showed using the ADSB plugin. On this slide, you can actually see, I'm sure you can't read them, but there are little annotation markers across the screen here, which tell you which frequencies various broadcasters use, and it's using a plugin called FRAN, for Frequency Annotator. And again, that adds more capability. It's a free plugin. Written by our friend Eric Cottrell, who was one of the first guys to develop plugins for us. Scheduler has been recently updated, and what it lets you do is it lets you set multiple timers that will turn on your RSP at a certain time, and you can either record a single station, you can record the entire spectrum so that you can go back and look at it later. So if there's something cool happening when you think you're going to be asleep in bed, you want to check it the next day, make it record. But the scheduler can do much more than that. It can repeat events every day, every hour. It can load plugins. And some of the plugins will automatically start when you when the schedule kicks off. Some of them, we're waiting for the developers to make them auto start. So tons of capability that you get through the scheduler. Profiles won't mean much to you until you start playing with it, but basically what a profile does, it saves all your receiver settings, all your frequencies, and ranges, and filters, and you name it. All that stuff is saved and can be recalled just by a mouse click. That's very useful because, let's say you wanted to record one of your favorite stations just because you wanted to get the news at 9 o'clock or something, and you won't be home from this meeting till 9 o'clock. Well, you can just set the scheduler to record at 9 o'clock. Well, if you did that, but you forgot and you'd actually gone off and you were listening to HF before you left home, when 9 o'clock came around and the recorder started, it would be recording HF, whatever frequency you left it on, and not the station you wanted to listen to. Whereas if you specify a profile for that schedule, you can specify that it records that particular station at that time, if that makes any sense. So, continuing on, software roadmap, and the big thing coming up in the future is 2.0, where we finally get to be cross-platform. But what I really want to highlight to you here is all these software enhancements, and I tried to pick out a few of the key ones just there. They're all free updates, and they all work on all models of the RSP, even the original RSP1 from way back when. Mike, when was it introduced? 8 years ago or something?
2016, August.
Okay, so 6 years ago.
Yeah.
So the RSP1 is long gone and been replaced with the 1A. But the scanners and the memory banks and all that stuff, that works with all the models. You know, the RSP2 was replaced with the RSPDX, but it's still supported by all these new features. Now, the only things that you don't get are things that are hardware specific. So, for example, I told you about the Rsb Duo that's got dual tuners and so can do diversity. There's no way you can do diversity if you don't have two tuners. So you don't get that feature for all models, okay? And on some of the newer models, we also, you guys won't care about it because it doesn't really exist over here, but digital audio broadcasts are quite common in Europe, and we added some filters for nulling those out, and you need the right hardware for that to support. But basically, all the software and all the new features have been free of charge to you for whatever your original hardware investment was. And when you consider that an RSP1A sells for what, about $100, that's a heck of a deal. Think about the Yaesus and Icons. If they're going to introduce some new features, they're going to want you to buy a new rig, right? You don't get to upgrade all the old rigs with all the bells and whistles you get on the new rigs. Whereas if you get this little plastic box, you get all this stuff. And I think that's pretty dynamic, and it's a tremendous bang for the buck. So, pan adapters. Let me see if I can see the room here for a minute, Mike. Who there is interested in pan adapters? Raise your hand real quick. Okay. 2 of you, is that all? Okay. So, this is one of the main reasons why people want to get an SDR like an RSP1A. It's because when you're tuning a signal, it's very hit and miss on a conventional radio. You have to turn the dial, pause, listen, and so on. Very hard to find signals. Whereas if you have an RF spectrum view, like you see in the graphic here, you can see where the transmissions are. So wouldn't it be cool if you could just click where you see a signal and have your radio tuned to that frequency? And yes, you can. And some of the newer radios have what they typically call band scopes built in. What I would say for the built-in ones is, I don't know about you guys, but my eyes aren't that good in my old age, and I'd hate to squint and try and see anything on that display, whereas I can have an arbitrarily large PC monitor and put up a huge spectrum, which is pretty cool. So that's why people like pan adapters. That's why people use them to extend the life of their existing rig. So again, what you've done is, you're taking your trusty old rig that you know and love, and you've added all the new bells and whistles for $100 if you buy an RSP1A. So again, very, very cool feature. This gets back to what Mike was mentioning earlier. One of the things you can do, since you can have those multiple VRXs in SDR Uno, is you can have your rig on one band, and you can look at the other bands on the display to see when they become active, which is really cool. And here's a picture, for example, and this one where I'm looking at what, 20, 30, and 40 meters, that falls within the 10 megahertz maximum width of an RSP1 or an RSP-DX. So you don't actually need a Duo to do this. You can actually get those three popular HF bands out of any of the RSP family members. And so the way this is set up, if I've got the thing connected to my rig, is I can look at any of these three bands, I can click on them to tune, and I can listen on the computer to see if anything's active. And if anything looks like I might want to talk to somebody, if they're calling CQ, for example, there is a little switch which you can't see very well on the RS control window called Rig Sync 1 or RSYN 1. And right now it's clicked on this one. So the rig would be tuned to 7.077. But if I went down here and monitored, it's actually WWV, isn't it, 10 megahertz. But if for some reason I wanted to tune my rig to 10 megahertz, if I click the RSYN 1 button down here on the third VRX, it will tune the rig to 10 megahertz. So you get lots of flexibility. You can do all sorts of cool things. Mike mentioned it was useful to measure multiple bands. If you're doing contesting and you want to see what's going on, that's true. The other thing is in times when propagation's not so good, like now, sometimes you just want to keep an eye on other bands and wait until you see the signals start popping up. And that's a really cool feature. Any of the programs that support the RSB, you can make a pan adapter out of them. Most of them have got some sort of built-in capabilities to do it. The one piece of add-on software you need if you're using SDR Uno or SDR Console is called OmniRig, and it's a free download from their website. So again, that's not going to cost you anything. We've got a ton of information, and I'm going to get to that later. But I do want to stress one thing here, and when you're playing around with a sensitive receiver like an RSP in the vicinity of your rig, which is a powerful transmitter, you need to make sure that you don't blow up the RSP. And there's a number of different ways you can do it. If any of you guys have got like a Kenwood TS590SG, which is what I have on loan from Kenwood here, it has a protected output that you can use to drive your RSP directly. Some rigs, a lot of Yaesus have an RX out to RX in loop through. That provides a protected output you can use through a splitter to feed the RSP and use the splitter to feed it back to RX in, so you can still use the audio in the rig or the audio coming out of the RSP. If you don't have any of those options, then you can buy an external switch, and MFJ were good enough to redesign their original MFJ 1708 switch to take on board some inputs that we gave them that would help people trying to build pan adapters. So now we have this MFJ 1708B-SDR, which was built specifically for this type of application, and this allows you to implement a pan adapter safely with any rig that's got cat control. I don't know how I change slides there. Okay, so I just want to stress it's very important because we don't like it if you buy an RSP and then blow it up. It's very frustrating. Okay, so software-wise, we have downloads on our website for all the stuff we're responsible for, and you can very easily get to SDR Uno to download that. If you want some other software, then by selecting your particular model of RSP and what your operating system is, because some people want to use a Raspberry Pi, or they're using a Mac, or any other type of Linux, you can input that here and it will bring up the software that's applicable. So all the software's there for you. We have this fantastic documentation and video catalog that has got literally hundreds of documents and videos showing how you can do various things. You can kind of see some on the screen here. Mike has done a superb job generating a lot of these. Many of them are videos, some of them have accompanying PDFs you can download, and you can search through the search box at the top. So whatever you're trying to do, the chances are there's a video there already. There's the YouTube video channel, which includes Mike's video guides. You can go straight to YouTube and you can go through that. In fact, these must be yours, Mike, because you're the only one that numbers everything, right?
Yeah.
Number 1, number 21,
Yeah.
number 17, number 16. So there's a dead giveaway that it's Mike. You know it's me because mine always all have nice intro slides. Mike's has got more substance over appearance. If you're into Facebook, there are 2 Facebook groups, one for SDRplay in general, and one for SDR Uno in particular. There are over 10,000 people playing on Facebook with that. It's a great resource for finding out what other people are doing with your SDRplay. We do not run those groups. They are run by enthusiastic users. They are the admins, not us. But we do monitor the groups, as you can see on these screenshots here. John Hudson, one of the founders of SDRplay, based in the UK, and some guy called Mike Ladd, who at this time was a rising star, Mike. So he will make his presence known there. If you go to the help page at SDRplay.com, there's all sorts of good stuff you can get into here. You can check on the order if you order direct from us, but most of you guys will be ordering from HRO anyway. There's information that helps you decide which particular product you want. If you've got a support ticket working, you can check the status on that. If you're a new user, we've got a start here flow where you just follow the steps on screen and it'll get your software installed and up and running. And then what we did was we took we analyzed our help system and we dug out all the most common questions and we put it in this section here. So you can kind of drill down with you've got a hardware problem or a software problem and you know how to get the answers you want. If you don't find the answers you want, then you have the option to open up a ticket. So I went through that super quick. There's our website, this catalog we talked about. There's the users forum over in groups.io. That's another forum that people use. If you send email to support@usa@sdrplay.com, Mike or I will probably answer that. The Facebook groups we talked about, and you can purchase them at Ham Radio Outlet, which is just down the street from you guys in sunny Milwaukee. So, enough of that. Let's, any of you guys still awake? Let's show of hands if you're awake.
Still awake.
Hey, all right. So, I actually went through a lot of material there in about less than half the time it normally takes, so that you've got a feel for the deal, for what's in there. We would like to take some questions and maybe amplify on some of the stuff we went over too quickly.
Steve, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, just about.
You and I talked before, for the guys that don't have CAT, for the guys with the older transceivers, is there any way you can hook this to the IF?
Well, there's 2 things. Did you say they don't have CAT?
Well, for the guys that don't have the newer receivers, but a lot of the older Kenwoods had IF out. Is that good enough?
You can use IF out, but let me jump back in the presentation here and I'll show you why I don't like IF out. It's certainly doable and some people are happy with it. There's the slide I had. Oh, I missed it. I thought I had a thing that...
The RSP would need to sit on the IF and you would tune through the...
There we go. So, you know, this RX out, if you don't have RX out, then maybe you'll have IF out. But if you use IF out, like it says here, the bandwidth is limited by your IF bandwidth. So what that means is when we talk about monitoring 20 meters while working 40 meters, you won't be able to do that. For the simple reason that the IF out just doesn't have the bandwidth you need to look at a different band at the same time. Now, will it display the band you're working? Yes, it will. You'll be able to get that displayed. So you know, if you just want to add a single band scope, you could do that. But if you don't have IF out, my recommendation would be use the external TR switch. Okay?
Okay.
Because that way you still can explore the full capabilities of the RSP. So here's another thing, for example, you know, I know a lot of people have older rigs that are HF only, so maybe they do, what, 50 megahertz or something? But if you were to use this approach with the external TR switch, you could use the RSP to monitor 2 meters as well, or 70 centimeters, whatever. You know, you can access the full frequency range of the RSP. Sure, you can set it to the same band as the rig and just do the basic band adapter stuff. But by having the external TR switch, you unleash a lot more potential. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And with the switch, the radio doesn't need to be on. You can still use the RSP as a receiver.
Yeah. You know what else you can do? It's just kind of mundane, but if you've got the switch going, and if you're busy just chewing the fat with someone on the radio, you can tune into your local broadcast stations on the RSP and get some background music and keep your music.
I got questions.
You know what? You could set it to one of the weather frequencies and listen to the National Weather Service. You know, when they're telling you about the next blizzard that's about to come in off the lake and dump on you guys.
You don't get about the I got a question, Joe. Is there a timeline on the SDR Uno 2.0? Because I saw a bullet point. I saw a bullet point there where you can link the panels. That's something.
Yeah, it's gonna come out when it's ready.
It's gonna come over the screen.
Too bad they announced it ahead of time.
Come on.
Thinking the panels, I know a lot of people like that, but let me show you something. Let me jump back to my other screen here. Okay, here's some panels, right? Now, if you hit this MA button at the top of the screen, if you want to get rid of those panels, you know, you can dump them all down to the bottom at one go. Notwithstanding this plugin I've got running. So, you know, here's file management. I can bring them back just by a click at the bottom, okay? Now, that's not to say that, no, I haven't stuck the panels together. You can still move them around. But, and I don't know if I even got it set up on here. If you don't like that panel arrangement, okay, I don't think I've got anything else set up on here. But you can set up a different panel arrangement if all you want is SP1 as big as possible. And let's see, let's get an RS control window going, and I'll stick that down there, for example. If that's what I wanted, then I can save that workspace, and well, actually I can call it test or whatever else I want to call it. So now, if I go back to default workspace, that's what we were looking at before. But if I want a different panel arrangement, all I have to do is click here and go test, and I've got a different workspace. So that kind of removes the necessity for having the panels all stuck together, because you can set up any arrangement that you like. And I don't know if Mike's got anything that he can show you at the moment, but I guarantee you his setup is completely different to mine.
I can share my screen.
Yeah, I was going to say, maybe if you share your screen, I don't know, do I have to stop sharing for that to happen?
No, you guys should see my screen. Let me just get you out of the way.
Looks like I'm seeing it. Yeah. Actually, it does look remarkably like me, except for that nasty window in the top middle that you love so much.
Oh, the X control. Yeah, it's basically, it's very versatile. SDR Uno, it's originally it was module based, where you would have separate modules, the RX control, the X control, aux SP, main SP, but you can rearrange, like Steve said, you can rearrange the panels however you like, and then save your workspace.
Yeah, I can't let this go without mentioning in passing. I was joking about this EXW panel that Mike has at the top there. It's got some very powerful controls there for the noise blanking, noise reduction, and manually setting notch filters. It's also a great way to get yourself into all sorts of trouble if you don't really know what you're doing. when I do it, you'll notice that didn't appear on my screen. I X that one pretty firmly. I just don't want to mess with it. If you do screw it up, there's nothing to stop you going back and doing. Mike, go to option reset on yours. You can go to the options and there's a reset deal there. So if you do screw things up, you can always reset everything. So it's not the end of the world. But there's been some discussion lately about oh, that's fancy.
Can you see it zoomed in?
Yeah.
Okay.
You know, some people have been saying, well, Uno is too complicated to use, and I would maintain it's only as complicated as you need it to be. If you're Mike, you want it complicated. You want the EXW window open. He's got his scanner window open, I see down there. I'm surprised he's got his Facebook open as well. But you know what I'm saying? So he has his own set of windows that he uses all the time. And he's probably got several different sets of windows with different workspaces set up to support that. What I showed you on mine is what I tend to use, which is very basic setup with just memory panels, because I like to you know, bring in my stored frequencies. So which Mike also uses, I see on the left there. So you can very much configure it how you like, and you can save that as a workspace. You can also do that in conjunction with the profile feature to let you zoom in on. I've got to ask, who there is a? We got any newbies? New hands?
No, Peter.
Yeah.
But he's an extra, so.
Okay, if you're new, and I'm still relatively new myself, Kilo India 5 is a very new call sign, right?
Yep.
So, how well do you memorize what the bands are? Like if I said 40 meters, who could tell me what the frequency range was? It's a rhetorical question.
We asked Lloyd for that when we have.
Well, Mike will now demonstrate, Mike will click on 40 meters on his panel there or something. Okay, there's 40 meters, and look at the range there. It runs from 7 to 7.3 megahertz, and that is the 40 meter band.
So we have all the CW on the lower portion. We have the FT8, probably FT8, hardly any JC65. We have a big chunky voice signal right here in lower sideband. I don't have to set the mode when I use the band framing. It sets the mode for me, and it sets the step size for me too, I believe. Most of the time in upper sideband, lower sideband, you want your step size set to about 500 hertz or 250, however you want to set it. So when you're clicking about, it snaps to that step size. So if I go here, I can see, I can adjust the filter. I can zoom in on his signal here. I can see if he's overmodulating. I can see if he's splattering. If I'm working the station,
hey,
and I have...
Uno song just went by.
Oh yeah, on a Sunday. If there's splatter and I want to move about, if there's lots of visual information when you're using a software-defined radio.
Hey, Mike,
It's all visual.
For idiots like me, it also doesn't let you scroll outside the band.
No, the LO is locked, so it locks the band in place, what you're seeing in the spectrum. If I want to go out, I can click the 40 meter band again, and it will take me out of the band framing mode, and I'm free to go to another band.
See, what used to happen to me was when I first started doing it, I would be tempted by there was nothing going on in the band, but there was some stuff just above it or just below it. And since I wasn't really aware where the band ended, I'd waste my time trying to get some signal that actually wasn't, you know, within the handband at all. So lots of flexibility, lots of capabilities. Was there anything we haven't covered, Mike?
Not that I can think of. Is there any questions or comments or anything that myself or Steve can assist you guys with? Especially with let's say band adapters. I can tell you guys real quick what I use it for. I check to see band conditions. So just to give you briefly, the spectrum here, it's very colorful. Very strong signals come up very bright. Weak signals, they'll represent weak colors. So I can check how propagation is just by looking at the color of the spectrum. I can see right now that 40 meters, that there's activity.
Yeah.
If I go to 20, it's dead. The noise floor is dead. Everything is hardly any activity. But I can keep an eye on it If I see this little weak signal right here that's peaking, that little CW signal here, it might brighten up. If the rest of the spectrum brightens up, I know that I have a band opening. And then I can go right to that band and try to work as many stations, especially if you're a contester. If you're not a contester and you want to see who's calling CQ, if you want to see even how the bands are going. And if I go too fast, you guys, just please let me know and I'll definitely slow down. I can go right into the plugins, I can load up the cluster, and I can see who's on, what time, you know, what stations are broadcasting right now. So if I load up the cluster, let's just stop this. I'll put in my false line.
Mike, let me interrupt you for a second. I don't know if these guys know about DX clusters and what clusters
Anybody, are you guys familiar with clusters?
Yep.
Okay. So I can visually see the activity on my spectrum. It will annotate those stations. So let's say if I'm looking for a VK, if I'm looking to get Australia, and I see a VK pop up on the spectrum, you know I'm going to click on it and try to work that station. But before I click, you know, I'm going to listen first to make sure it is the VK station, and then I'm going to try to work them. Without the spectrum, I wouldn't know if the bands are active. Without the cluster, sure, you can use log4OM, that has a cluster, HRD has a cluster, but it's integrated into SDRuno, so it's streamlined into one package, where you don't have to use 9,000 other pieces of software to do the same thing. It just we try to keep everything within SDRuno.
Mike did a video on DX Cluster, or I think it showed up in a couple of videos we did, which are available from that video catalog we showed you on the website earlier.
There's documentation. It's almost, a lot of people say SDRplay, it's almost information overload. We have documentations and videos in the hundreds, and it's all relevant. It's not, you know, stuff from 2000, there's stuff from 2016, but as we find out stuff, we want to share it with the community. We share it with the groups IO, Facebook, our blog, Twitter, you know, because we're as enthusiastic too. I mean, we also use these radios. I'm also a user. So the more the merrier. The more software there is, the better that it is for the community, the people, the users, and just as a whole. And as Steve said, almost 99% of everything is free. Most of all the software is free.
Yeah, the only things we've mentioned tonight, I think, that cost money would be Ham Radio Deluxe as a paid-for package, as you guys know, and Black Cat Systems. The software is paid for, but the plug-in to interface to it is free. So.
Any other questions or comments or anything that I can demonstrate possibly to show you guys, or even new hams? You know, there's no stupid question. I'd be more than happy to answer you guys.
Yes, there are. I ask stupid questions all the time.
I'm not going to answer you.
Is there a way of putting them in standby? You want to use them with a transmitter?
I'm sorry, say that again?
So if you want to use an SDR receiver with a transmitter, and every time you transmit, you have to shut it off, or is there a standby circuit that you can use to alleviate RFing the front end of the unit?
No, Steve will answer also.
Slide again, Mike. Can you unstop the screen for a minute?
Sure, just bear with me.
They got a switch.
TR switch.
Okay.
Do I have to tell?
Disconnects it.
Okay.
That's one.
I think I may have to share my screen rig to the control input on the TR switch, and then every time you key the mic, it tells this switch to disconnect the Rsb from the antenna and connect your rig directly through to the antenna. Okay, and that way you're protected. Now, in addition to that, if you have the cat control to sync the two together, when you transmit, the SDRuno will mute the audio and mute the RF, which isn't a protection measure, it's just to stop the screen going crazy. You'll still see it. You'll still see some feed through because those switches provide infinite isolation, but they will knock the signal down enough that you won't damage the RSP. Does that answer your question?
Yep.
And again, there are a bunch of, if you search a PAN adapter in that video catalog, I counted 30 because I was looking it up for a customer earlier today. There are 30 videos and app notes just on the subject of PAN adapters. So, what I recommend is there's one called the PAN Adapter Webinar, which is one of the most recent it's the most comprehensive overview we've done of implementing pan adapters and the various options that are available. So if you're only going to watch one video, I recommend that one. And there is a PDF you can download so you can refer to it as well.
Steve,
Yeah.
what is the purpose of the GPS input on that box? What does it do?
Sorry, I didn't catch the purpose of what?
The GPS input.
The clock reference in, the GPS Duo.
Yeah, the Leo Bodnar time reference thingy. I don't know if Mike wants to address this. Personally, I wouldn't use it.
It's used to lock the tuner to the satellites, and you will not drift. The RSPs, it's for people that are basically doing satellite work that need precise frequency for it to be exactly locked on down to a hertz.
The RSPs themselves have a TCXL already, so they're extremely accurate out of the box. I forget what the data sheet says. Was it 0.5 ppm or something, Mike?
Yeah, I'm out by about 100 hertz on WWB, uncalibrated.
Yeah, so out of the box they're accurate. There's a calibration feature within SDR Uno that lets you get even closer. If that's not close enough for you, then you can use an external GPS reference. But the number of people that need that, you could probably count on one hand. I think there's also some sort of frequency contest that goes on from time to time, isn't there, Mike?
The ARLs.
Yeah.
Oh, what's the name of that?
I don't know, but I've never really understood that because the frequency is drifting due to propagation conditions and stuff to some extent. So, people that absolutely have to have it, the technical term I use is nuts on. If it's got to be nuts on, you can use that external GPS reference. I have never used one myself. I have never even, I had to check it out so I knew how it worked, but I've never felt the need to even just do a calibrate.
Yeah, same here. I just use the calibration feature built into SDR Uno. And like I said, I'm at most 150 hertz out, which is, that's nothing.
What I do is, as I mentioned, when I'm tuning, I'll click on a signal I see on the waveform, and then I'll look up in that SP2 window, that expanded window, and I will just scroll my mouse wheel until it's centered in the window. That's good enough for me. I don't really care what the frequency readout says. If it's off by 100 hertz from where it's supposed to be, no big deal. That's not to say there aren't some people who, you can have your own area of interest, right? I mean, you can be an SWL guy and do better than you've ever done before with this, or you can get big time into satellite weather images, and you can do that. You can get into the ADS-B thing, you can do FMDXing. Everybody has their own different fields, and when I was showing you all that different software early on, a lot of the capabilities that we've talked about today were not things that came from SDRplay. We just made some hardware. We threw the hardware out there, and the user community jumped all over it and started doing all sorts of cool stuff that I don't know if Mike expected it, but it was a complete surprise to me as to all the cool things they've done with it, And I go and see this guy up the street here that's big on the GOES weather satellites, and he's sitting there and he's bending bits of copper tubing and stuff and making these corkscrew helical type antenna things and doing all that. And he's just got it mounted on the camera tripod, and he's still hooked up to an old Rsb 2. He doesn't even have the latest and greatest. And he's producing professional grade images. So take this little box and just explore it. And what a lot of people do is they'll start with an RSP1A, and they'll suddenly decide it makes a great pan adapter. So they may do something like I did with the Kenwood here. I just bolted the RSP1A on the side of it to use as a pan adapter. And then, they'll go off and they'll buy a Duo or a DX and pursue other areas of interest. Again, people like me came in being an SWL guy, and I suddenly found some of the other cool stuff I could get out of the same hardware, and I suddenly became interested in different fields. And you know, it's pretty much no risk because these things don't get obsolete. You know, we keep updating the software and they'll continue to work with it. So, you know, it's cool.
Steve and
Yeah.
Mike, it's after 8 o'clock, so at this point in time, we need to kind of move along with our meeting, but I want to thank you for a wonderful presentation. I'd love to keep going if we had the time. Thanks very
Thank you
much.
for having us.
You know it's time to go when the lights go off, right? So, Joe, I'm going to rely on you to circulate copies of the presentation.
I will.
And if any additional questions come up, feel free to send to the emails you've got. Or Joe, I think you've got my direct SDRplay email. And I don't know, if you do a separate DX demo day and you're playing with it up there and you want to try and call us in and do something with you in real time or something weird's happening and you want help with it, let us know.
Thank you so much, guys, for this. This was great.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, that I could not hear if anyone else said anything, so I'll say good night and 73s.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
All right.